Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast, where we're on a journey to find out the truth about psychedelics and plant medicines, get rid of the myths, and change the narrative. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and with us today is a very, very special guest, John Waller. John is the former owner and principal of Uncage the Soul Productions, an Oregon-based video production company dedicated to bringing unique and exceptional stories to life. But anyone listening or watching will note that I used the word former to describe that occupation. As profound as that work had to be, John, it's not who you are today.
For sure.
Today's episode is about psychedelics as a tool for facing our mortality. And in light of the difficulty of discussing this subject matter, John, I truly welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me on Webdelics.
We're thrilled to have you here, man. Now, before we get into the meat of the show, you and I did a pre-interview meeting, and we bonded. At least I felt we bonded. You may have secretly hated me, but I became your fan immediately.
We're real fans.
And one of the things I realized, I think we both came to a discovery about during that conversation, was that we have something in common outside of just being on this show. From the very first episode of the Webdelics podcast, one of the things that I have been honest about has been my own background as a driver of my interest in psychedelics and plant medicine. In particular, I had a childhood, it's painful to talk about, was traumatic, chaotic, and explosively violent. And when I began to find out that psychedelics were a modality that could really help people that were struggling with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which I had, I became a lot more invested and interested in the power and potential of psychedelics. And it's something that is hard to talk about, particularly as a man, but I think that it's important for honest discussions about this sort of thing to happen as frequently as possible, because only when we're out there talking about it can change begin to happen for other little boys or other kids who might be in the same situation that I was. John, you had a similarly difficult childhood. Is that correct?
I had, in many respects, I had a wonderful childhood. Upon reflection as an adult, back to that childhood, I have been able to realize some darker aspects of that childhood that I don't think that I was aware of until I was a fully grown adult, encountering some mental health issues that I couldn't put a finger on as to their origin or why I was feeling a certain way. And so it has taken a lot of therapy work and a lot of work with psychedelics to access the source of some of that trauma that did happen for me in my childhood. I wouldn't say that it was an acute trauma in the sense of a very specific incident or moment of abuse. It's more of a chronic trauma that occurred over a long period of time, many years. And it was, it wasn't even intentional. It was a product of the environment in which I was growing up in that deeply affected me, as I've realized now as an adult.
That's really well put, and it goes as to again, going to commonalities that you and I have, as well as a lot of folks that are listening to or watching the show might have. Like you, the situation I faced was ongoing. It wasn't like one day I came home and suddenly there was blood on the floor and a murder in the house. But it was the environment that I grew up in. It was, look, the people in my life that I grew up with were doing their best, but it had a long-term effect when these sorts of incidents occurred time after time after time again. Now, I was in therapy for 11 years, and psychedelics never even came up as a possible way for me to deal with this. And something I feel passionately about is that if people could have a way of dealing with these issues effectively without going to therapy for 11 years, seriously, right? That is well worth knowing about and discussing more. How, in this context, did psychedelics come into your life, particularly as related to any counseling that you had?
Yeah. Well, my therapy journey wasn't 11 years, but I would say that it was 6 or 7 at least of that more traditional therapy, talk therapy, where I would go and see a therapist once a week or once every 2 weeks. We would talk for 50 minutes, and I would leave feeling very unsatisfied, very disconnected from the person that I had just talked to, and feeling like I had just recycled and regurgitated the same 30% of territory that I had been going over again and again and again. And it felt like I was really hitting my head against this wall and not really being able to uncover any new information or new insights. And over a period of time, a long time, many years, and a lot of money, I found this growing frustration with a lack of what I perceived as a lack of progress. And so at a certain point, I was passed along a copy of Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
And in that book, he talks a lot about psychedelics as a tool in tandem with therapy that can have profound and very potent effects on that therapy work. So I was immediately excited because I just instinctively knew, yes, this is the tool that I've been missing. And so then the big question, the elephant in the room question is, well, how do you get it? How do you do this work? Because it's illegal, right? So I was like, great, I know what I need, but where do I find it? Fortunately, Portland, Oregon is a fairly progressive place, and there was a strong psychedelic community that is present here in Portland that puts on conferences and workshops. And I attended one of those conferences one summer of 2019, and it was a full day of presenters, and people were talking from everything from sex orgies with psilocybin to the chemical makeup of different psychedelic drugs, and the entire spectrum of topics related to psychedelics, right? And some of it was, not really that interesting to me. Some of it was fascinating.
Was your mind blown hearing all this stuff? I gotta ask.
Oh,
mine would have been all in pieces on the floor.
It was a fantastic fire hose of insight and information into the world of psychedelics that I'd never been exposed to before, right? And so I'm sitting in this audience of people, which, just exceptional people watching as well, because it's people from every walk of life that's there, right? All sharing this same interest and fascination in the use of psychedelics in various aspects of their life, whether it is in the work of healing, whether it is recreational, whether it's scientific, whether it's to enhance their sex life, all of the above. So the day went on, and a lot of the talks were interesting, But the keynote speaker at the end of it was a woman, a therapist who had been working with psychedelics in her
Mm-hmm.
practice for about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she got up on stage and she started talking about this therapy work using psychedelics to uncover and work with trauma, abuse, depression,
Mm.
anxiety. And I felt like she was talking
Wow.
directly to me.
Wow.
I just, the entire room disappeared. And it was as if it was just her and I in the room, and she was talking at me, identifying me as the person she was talking about.
Wow.
And I was like, she's the reason why I came today, and I didn't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
So after her presentation, I went up to her and jockeyed for position to have a moment with her, and I said, you spoke so directly to me and my circumstances. I really would love to work with you."
Mm.
She's, of course, very much in demand and
Mm-hmm.
had a pretty booked calendar, but I started communicating with her, and we found a time for me to come in and have some like introductory therapy sessions,
Okay.
not using psychedelics, but to get to
Mm-hmm.
know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we were eventually able to get a journey on our calendar in which I went in and worked with her in an altered state using psychedelics.
Mm.
We used both MDMA and psilocybin.
Mm-hmm.
And in those 6 or 7 hours, I processed therapy, trauma, uh, insight into my condition than I had in the previous 5 years combined in those 5 hours. And
But
I've heard it described this way. Traditional therapy is like, okay, I want to walk from Oregon. I want to go from Oregon to Florida.
mm-hmm.
And so traditional therapy is like, well, you put on your shoes and you start walking.
Yeah,
Using
I can relate.
psychedelics, it is like you still want to go from Oregon to Florida, but now you're given a car,
Mm.
right? And it's this vehicle that can so dramatically um, improve the speed through which you can work through whatever the issues are that are holding you back, or that are consuming you, or that are um, weight on your shoulders. So I was like, yes, yes,
Wow.
this is this is a gateway for me.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so I worked with her again twice, and then the pandemic happened, and of course everything shut down indefinitely, and including in-person sessions.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't particularly keen on doing remote virtual journey work, and
Yeah.
so it ended up far on the back burner as the world went through a state of upheaval. So um, six fast forward 8 months later, um, a lot had changed in my life, including dissolving the company, Uncage the Soul Productions, that I
Right.
had run for 15 years,
Right.
and immediately thereafter receiving a stage 4 colorectal cancer diagnosis. So the pivot that I was thrown into
Mm-hmm.
was um, just it it I mean, you can't ever prepare for something like that. And so I was
Right.
thrown into this new set of circumstances in my life in which I knew I had to have solid therapy support to guide my mental journey through whatever it was that I was going to be facing. So I reached out to this woman, this therapist that I'd been working with, and she had started tracking in a different direction in terms of the
Mm-hmm.
kind of work that she was doing, and wasn't particularly available. But she referred me to another therapist that I I called immediately, and I talked to her on the phone. I remember the conversation. I'm sitting in a Fred Meyer parking lot, Fred Meyer's a grocery store here in Portland, and I'm sitting in the parking lot, and I'm having this phone call with her in my car, and I'm talking to her in a fairly desperate state. You
I
know,
can only imagine.
I know that I need help, and I'm fairly desperate in trying to recruit that help. She also was in very high demand and didn't have a lot of availability in her calendar. But like the first therapist, we found some time in our calendars where I could come in, get to meet her for an hour or so, and we could talk. And that would be the foot the foothold into her
Right.
schedule, into her calendar. So, um, I get off the phone with her, and not more than 10 minutes later, I get a text from her. And the text says, "You're not going to believe this, but my patient, my client for this weekend just canceled. And so I have an opening
Wow.
in 2 days to have a
Wow.
journey with
Wow.
me,
Wow.
and it's yours if you'd like it." And
Wow.
I was like, "Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah." So I
So,
hadn't even met her yet.
that's amazing. I'm going to stop here though before we get into a little bit more detail about what happened next and track back just a little bit because
Sure.
there are some things that you mentioned earlier that I want to fully be able to wrap my mind around and understand.
Yeah.
You likened the psychedelic journey that you went on to deal with the childhood traumas as accomplishing the equivalent of a foot walk from Portland to New York City to going to the same trip on a car in terms of time savings,
Yeah.
effort, and energy savings. And you said that during those hours that you were engaging on that very first journey, that you had processed and were able to deal with more than you had during years of talk therapy.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like so that we
Hmm.
can understand what was going on. I can't even begin to fathom how that's even possible. Like, were you seeing visions of things that were suddenly flicking light switches on in your mind and things getting resolved? I don't know. My imagination will go anywhere that's crazy, and I would prefer to have this conversation grounded in something else than my crazy rantings and ravings.
Yeah. So I tend to be a person that um, can be very guarded. I internalize emotion, and I have a very strong set of protectors. These are my parts, my guardians that are
Mm.
internal to my psyche that
Mm.
work really, really hard to keep me safe.
Mm.
And the consequence of that, while they do a really amazing job of that, the consequence is that they prevent me from really dipping into areas of
Yeah.
euphoric joy and
Mm-hmm.
deep pain and sadness. They keep me on a very narrow plane,
Yeah.
a narrow emotional plane. And that has been a pattern of mine through my entire life,
Yeah.
which has made it, uh, it has kept me from the dark pits of pain and despair, but it's also prevented me from
Mm.
feeling uh, deep joy and love,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what and those protectors are on high alert when I'm in a traditional therapy setting talking to somebody
Mm.
because I'm engaging with another human,
Yeah.
and those protectors being ever vigilant
Yeah.
are are keeping me guarded.
Yeah.
They're keeping me uh, they're keeping me from accessing
Yeah.
a lot of that
Yeah.
subconscious material that
Yeah.
I'm not even aware of
Yeah.
that informs how I behave,
Yeah.
how I react, how I talk, how I interact with people, right? So when I discovered psychedelics and their ability to essentially disable that system and take those guardians and those
Mm.
protectors and like
Mm-hmm.
just put them to sleep, right? It's saying
Mm.
like, guys, take a break.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it opens me up in this way that I can feel safe treading into those areas of memory and feeling and fear without viscerally feeling terrified, right? So it allows me to explore those spaces of fear without being scared.
Look, and I got to say to you, in terms of my own therapeutic journey, part of what kept it going on for so long was the fact that I was using those exact same guardians. I had habituated to such an extent to really limiting my ability to feel or experience, let alone express certain emotions, that I was never able to access my entire emotional palette. And therefore, never able to, exactly what you're saying, feel the things that I needed to feel in order to even begin to process a lot of the challenges that I had until many, many years and all sorts of other modalities had passed. In terms of then what the meaning of that was from the perspective of your own initial journey of healing, how did you change after that first psychedelic series from where you were before you started, but before the cancer diagnosis?
Yeah. So I had been feeling levels of depression and anxiety and stress and a lack of joy in my life that I could not explain. Because if you were to look at my life and you were to survey the terrain of my life, you would say, you fucking like won the jackpot. You know, you've got an amazing life. You live in a beautiful place. You've got wonderful friends. You've got a fulfilling career. You've got relationships, like all like check, 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 right? All the things were present. Yet why was I feeling so like depressed? I couldn't explain it. And so what psychedelics were able to do for me is open up my view and start to make connections, right? So it's like every memory and feeling that we've ever had in our lives, I believe, is stored in a file system that is in our brain, right?
Yes. Yes.
And most of it's subconscious, and it's in a file within a file within a file within a file. And we don't even remember that it's there, right? So what psychedelics did is essentially allow me to rummage through that file drawer and start to cover memories and feelings and associations that started to explain to me why I was feeling this way in my adult life. And then it was like, oh,
right.
that explains a lot, which was, this was key, is that before that, I felt broken. I felt like I was broken because I was like, I'm a broken person. There's something wrong with me, right? And I would leave all of these therapists' offices that felt like doctors' offices that I went to, and I'm like, I feel like a sick, broken person. And I'm leaving feeling like a sick, broken person. What the fuck is wrong with me? What psychedelics did in tandem with therapy is enlightened me to that it wasn't me being broken. It was me being the product of a series of events and actions and inactions over the course of a lifetime that had led me to where I was today, which was a very whole person, just fractured, right? All the parts were there. I was just fractured. And I didn't really realize it. And so then once I could really understand why I was feeling this way based upon these life circumstances, then I could start to have love and compassion for myself.
You know, that sense of feeling broken, it really speaks to me, John. And I bet it speaks to a lot of folks who might be listening to this or watching this episode. And I love that you described so vividly what that mindset change looks like. It's inspiring. And I don't know that I have anything else to say except to thank you for making that clear in a way that no one else really has so far. So, taking in everything that you just said about your journey before the pandemic happened, talk to us a little bit about your cancer diagnosis, just in case people aren't clear, by the way, about some of the terminology. Stage 4 cancer, that's one of those words I hear all the time, and it sounds dire. What does stage 4 mean exactly?
Yeah. Well, in my circumstance, it was a worst case scenario. And what stage 4 colorectal cancer means is that you have an original tumor, cancer tumor that has formed in your colon or your rectum, and it has grown and eventually metastasized, meaning that cancer cells have left that original tumor and have moved into other areas of the body where they have lodged and started to grow additional tumors. So in my case, what that meant is that I had an original tumor in my rectum that had metastasized and formed tumors in my liver and in some lymph nodes in my abdomen. So that is not good.
First of all, I know it's a cliche to say, but I feel like I have to say it. I'm so sorry to hear that. I know it's not enough, but whatever. I can't help it. I need to at least express that. Now, this episode is being recorded in December of 2022. This occurred in 2020 when you received this diagnosis. Is that correct?
I first went to the doctor in mid-October of 2020. And it was the first time that I had been to the doctor in at least 5 years. I was by many measures a very fit, healthy, middle-aged male. And I had switched to a new insurance policy. And I thought, I'm going to put on my big boy pants and I'm going to adult and go see a doctor and get checked up because it's been a really long time. And there were a few issues that were mildly concerning to me. Nothing that had a sense of urgency to it, nor did these issues necessarily seem related to me. So I visited the doctor. He took a series of tests and a quick ultrasound on my abdomen. And this was on a Friday. That Sunday, I get a phone message from this doctor, and he leaves a voicemail on my phone. And he says, "Hey, I got some of these test results back, and there's definitely something that I'd like to talk with you about." Right? The classic, like, "Oh shit, this isn't good." Right? It's a Sunday afternoon, and your doctor's calling you saying he wants to talk about some stuff.
And he won't say what it is on the phone. That's pretty scary.
So I talked to him on Monday, and I go in for a series of more blood tests and more scans that, start to track us in a direction of diagnosis, because there's a lot of eliminating the possibilities, right? Honing in on, okay, what exactly is going on in your body? And 3 weeks later, I was handed a stage 4 colorectal cancer diagnosis.
John, I've got to ask, how old were you?
45.
I can't even imagine what must have been going through your head. But I can understand why you said earlier you knew immediately that you needed help of a therapist. I mean, if that were me, that's kind of the understatement of the year. You were able to see this lady, the psychedelic-based therapist, quite quickly.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what happened next.
So I I needed I knew that I needed to spin up a holistic approach to treating my cancer. Um, I had Western medicine, which was wanting to aggressively launch me into chemotherapy treatments. I connected with several naturopathic doctors to build a plan and a strategy that would complement that
Yep.
Western medicine approach.
Yep. Yep.
Those are all physical.
Yeah.
Those are all physical treatments to the
Yes.
body, and the missing pillar for me was that mental emotional
Yeah.
aspect that
Of course.
I knew intuitively was essential for me in navigating this, because it was calling into question everything for me. It was calling into question my purpose in life. It
Yeah.
was calling into question my identity as a person, and it was making me confront intimately my own mortality, which now felt incredibly fragile. And all of those things happened simultaneously in a very short period of time. And I needed help navigating that in a very powerful way, not in a, I'm going to go see a therapist for 50 minutes once a week kind of way. I needed the big guns to deal with this.
Yeah.
So I connected with this woman, and immediately, even on the phone in that first conversation with her, felt a very connected energy with her. I could just tell right away that energetically I was aligned with her. And when I first met her, we met on a Friday, and this was the Friday afternoon before I would have a journey with her on Saturday.
Wow.
And we met for a couple of hours to get to know each other in person,
Right.
because literally the next day I'm going to do a deep dive
Right.
in a very altered state into a very vulnerable set of circumstances with a person that I've never met before. So we needed to establish a rapport and a relationship, which we did for a couple of hours. And again, it doesn't take me long to feel the energy of a person, to assess their integrity, their care. And I knew right away that I was in really good hands right away. And
it's amazing how that happens sometimes, by the way, isn't it?
Yeah. And I will say that this woman that I have worked with is an incredible human being in terms of her capacity to provide attunement, emotional attunement, empathy, care, support, and not steer my ship, not tell me what to do or what to think or how to think, but to support me wherever I'm at, right? And this was my first experience with her was a significant departure from my previous therapist, in which that first one was very clinical, right? So she would be sitting in a chair, she would be taking notes, I would be doing my thing, sometimes on the ground, sometimes standing up. But she took a very clinical, neutral approach to working with me. When I worked with the second therapist, she, again, not only emotionally met me wherever I was at, but she physically met me wherever I was at. So if I was on the ground in the fetal position, she was right on the ground with me. If I was standing up feeling powerful, she was standing up feeling powerful with me, right? And this is also, I think, this is exceptional in therapy, and it probably represents a a gray area that can be easily abused in terms of physical contact. What was really important for me and my nervous system was that I have physical contact in those emotionally vulnerable states, because that is one of the things that I had been missing my entire life, was physical emotional connection when I'm feeling scared or lonely or isolated.
And we had just gone through COVID.
Yeah,
Where there were lockdowns and a lack of that.
absolutely. So, there's a set of ground rules that I have with her in terms of, what constitutes appropriate physical contact and what does not. We agree to those ahead of time. And then over the course of the session, with her always asking consent, physical touch is a part of the experience. And for me, that has been a really powerful addition to this experience, because it's something that my nervous system needed. Like, I could be in a state of fight or flight, nervous system through the roof agitation, and all it would take is a hand on my shoulder or a hand on my forehead, and I would just melt. That's all it took, right? Is that physical touch that would drop me into a space of safety and rest.
How did this journey, I assume it was a series of journeys, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I've worked with her dozens of times over the past couple of years now.
Thank you. What has that journey meant for you psychologically? How has it helped you deal with what's been going on with your physical health?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of motivations that I have in doing this work. One is that I have my suspicions that my cancer was the product, in part, of decades of internalizing emotion and holding that emotion in my system, right? Because my protectors kept me in that very narrow plane, right? And so I was internalizing anger, fear, sadness, right? And you hold that in your gut, right? And there was again, that intuitive sense is that, wow, it makes sense to me that over the course of a lifetime, I have cultivated an environment that is very conducive to this form of cancer taking hold, right? So if I'm going to address the cancer and try to heal myself, I have to focus on that internalized trauma and emotion that I'm holding on to. And I have to find a way to work with that. And it's not to forget about it. It's not to pretend it isn't there. It's not to run away from it. It is to directly attend to it head on. And through that process of working through it, then I can find peace with it. And perhaps that may be a vehicle for me to find healing from the cancer, right? In addition to all the other stuff,
of course,
allopathic and homeopathic that I was doing, this was also an essential part of that. I need to heal myself and process, right? So that was a motivation, is to unlock and uncover and maybe like my internal terrain, is to work to shift it from an environment that was conducive to cancer into an environment that was an anti-cancer environment, right? By releasing stress and trauma and working through this subconscious garbage that I felt was like in my system. The second motivation that I had was that I knew, and I think we all know, the potential and capacity of the mind to heal the body. that is, for the most part, unused or underutilized, right? And I think that we see glimpses of this through something like the placebo effect, where a cohort of people can be given a medicine that has an effect, right? Mm-hmm. A second cohort is given essentially a sugar pill that has no technical effect, right? And over a period of time, they will see how these two cohorts fare, and they will find that up to 60% of the people in the cohort that didn't receive the medicine will still have a benefit. And we can only attribute that to the belief that they had that it was working. And that is a glimpse at the power of the mind to heal the body through belief. And I was wanting to access the power of my mind to leverage that into the effort to heal my own body.
You know, it's interesting that you say that. One of the early episodes of this podcast was with a doctor named Molly Maloof, who talked about a patient that she had met, a man who had a tremor. And this tremor was keeping him from being able to eat. And with intensive psychedelic therapy, he was able to imagine himself or to experience himself operating on his brain in the area that was causing this disorder. And this tremor, which he had for a long time and was ruining his life, disappeared. It was the sort of thing that officially never happens, yet it did. And so really that aligns with what you're talking about. That is an extreme case of the mind literally being able to fix something that no modern medicine could. So I completely hear what you're saying, and thinking about how people are using psychedelics and plant medicine to bridge that gap between the body and the mind. It goes with everything that people who are following this podcast are learning. I have to ask though, and John, you know, I try to make sure that to the extent humanly possible, the words coming out of my mouth express the intent. So if I screw it up, I'm good at screwing things up, but understand that my intent is one that is respectful. My words might not come out the way I want them to. I'm just keeping it real. On some level, you're talking about these as healing possibilities and as a principal behavioral driver if it were me in your shoes. And for all I know, it could be anyone in your shoes one day. That's the power of your story. That would be the focus. But on some level, every possibility is out there. Do psychedelics help with assessing all of those? And again, I hope I'm not being disrespectful or crass. I just want to I want to be real.
Scott, the honest reality of my circumstances is that my prognosis is dire, and I'm not blind to that. And like I said, I was intimately confronted with my own mortality and continue to be, feeling that my life is precarious and fragile. And simultaneous to my effort to heal myself is a awareness that my life is fleeting, is likely fleeting. And so it's a weird conundrum that I face on a daily basis, in which I am striving to live and preparing to die all at the same time. And the third motivation for me in working with psychedelics was to begin to build a relationship with death and dying that I had never even considered before, because I'm a 45-year-old healthy guy. Like I'm, there was a long period of time in my life where I clearly felt invincible, as like many young men do. And
Yeah.
and I was now faced with my own imminent death that I just hadn't even conceived of. And so that's scary because there's so many unknowns about
Yeah.
it, and fears associated with it. And death and dying is a very sequestered uh, topic in our culture that is had dark closets,
Yeah.
and
I'm
in the
afraid to
way
even
that
say the
we,
word. Look at how I
yeah, the
framed
way,
the discussion.
sure, there's a sensitivity about it in which we tiptoe around the topic, which
Yeah.
is fascinating because the reality is that every one of us will die. It is a
Yeah.
universal truth that we all
Yeah.
share, and it's
Yeah.
curious as to why we don't talk more about it. Um, but I needed to explore this relationship with death and dying and what it meant
Mm.
for me, what it meant for the people that were surrounding me, and begin to, like I said, build a relationship with the concept.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's what has happened that I don't think that I was expecting is that in this therapy work with psychedelics as a tool is that I have been able to essentially practice dying.
What do you mean by that exactly?
So what that has looked like for me is that I will find myself in a place in which I am moments from death, not really, but
Yeah.
psychologically. And it's like I'm waiting in the lobby of the room of death, and I'm waiting there, and I'm going to be seen next, right? And so there's
Wow.
that moment of waiting, and then what that has looked like for me is like literally laying on the ground and like breathing my last breath. And what is that like? What physically? What does it feel like?
Yeah.
Psychologically, what does it feel like? And and then I'll lay there, and maybe 30 seconds later, I'll take a breath, and it's like, okay, not today,
Yeah.
not today. And I carry on, but I have been able to play around and practice with death and dying in such a way that it has taken the mystery and the fear uh, and the anxiety around it. Oh, it has turned the temperature down on those fears.
Mm.
And I actually had a very interesting experience on one of my journeys in which here in Oregon, doctor assisted suicide is a legal um, right in
Yeah.
which a person that has been diagnosed as having 6 months or less to live can
Mm-hmm.
opt into taking their own life. And so I needed to explore that a little bit. And so is this an option that when or if that time comes for me, is that something that I would want to do? Right. So now here's an
Yeah.
opportunity for me to play around with that, in which I'm not faced with having to make that decision now.
Mm-hmm.
I can practice and I can experiment with both decisions. So I sit there and I have a cup, and in that cup I put a little capsule that represents the pill that I would take in order to end my life. And I sit there, and in an altered state, I have a conversation with myself about whether or not I'm going to take that pill. And so in this space of safety and being held by my therapist, um, I can choose to take that pill. Okay, what does that feel like when you make that decision in your mind? How does that play out? What is the ripple
Wow.
effect of that moment, right?
Wow.
And then I can rewind and I can go back to that spot and I can say, I'm not going to do this. And I can set it down. And what is the ripple effect of that moment moving forward? How does that feel? How does that resonate? And now I'm able to play with these and really get a sense of what feels right for me.
Wow.
And because I'm in that open mind state, altered state that psychedelics provide, I'm able to explore these different pathways without feeling caught up in the emotion and the anxiety and the fear of them. And I can be open to possibility. So those are the kind of experiences that I've had that I find particularly valuable isn't even the right word, just insightful into like, what is my process like, so that when or if I get to that place, I have some practice. I have a little experience with those impossible decisions.
This is something that, first of all, I'm deeply affected hearing this. I also have to say this is a way of thinking about death, about facing our mortality, that frankly, until I heard the words coming out of your mouth, I could never have even imagined would be possible. I think when we planned this episode, I may have expected you to say it somehow helps me feel connected with the universe or at peace with what is to come, or some general metaphysical statement like that, which perhaps is part of what you have experienced during your journey. And this sort of metaphysical or more universal framework that the psychedelic journey may take you into sounds like it's been part of it. But this particular application, when it comes to some of the decisions that any of us might have to make one day, is something that I think a lot of people will want to consider, contemplate, and has to be taken seriously. And I understand why then this particular type of journey may have been something that, among the other motivations that you mentioned earlier, would have driven you into this particular path. John, what have you learned? How have you changed? Not just through the diagnosis that you're living with right now, but through the psychedelic journey that you have, that you've gone through to help cope with it. How has it transformed you?
I would say on a more superficial level that it has really helped ease a lot of the anxiety and fear that I have associated with my diagnosis and the potential of dying. I feel in general a lot of peace, and much of this work over the past 2 years has been to turn the temperature down on that anxiety and that internal toxic stew that was in my body and in my mind, and that is really quiet now. And so I feel a sense of ease, and I feel a sense of peace, and I feel a sense of almost relaxation with a
Wow.
lot of my data in a lot of my day-to-day experience. So
Wow.
that is, I will attribute some of that to my therapy work with psychedelics that have, you know, just um, they've given me perspective, they have given me insight, and that makes a lot of my day-to-day activities. I'm just able to navigate through things with an ease and a comfort that I don't know that I would have otherwise. So that's the superficial level
Yeah.
answer.
Do you
Question.
go
Yeah,
ahead?
go ahead.
Do you feel that your journeys have changed your understanding with of what death is?
I don't know that I have any greater clarity of what death is than when I started.
Yeah.
Of like, I don't come from a religious background. I don't subscribe
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of religious constructs of what death and dying will mean. But I think it has just kept me open to the potential and the possibility, and to be less concerned with having to know.
Mm-hmm.
Much of my, a good portion of my life is 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 a fire hose of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I have realized how much of my circumstances I have no control over. So when I have no control and just about everything is uncertain, how do I function as a human being in those two circumstances?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that this psychedelic assisted therapy has helped, like, make me a little more pliable, malleable, flexible,
Mm-hmm.
uh, sort of being okay with that,
Mm-hmm.
and being okay with the just immense spectrum of possibilities that are out
Right.
there in terms of both what death and dying might look like, and in terms of what my path might look like, right? Like, anything is possible.
Yeah.
And um, so I'm, how do you prepare for anything? It's not, you can't.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No.
I in terms of the other thing that it has done is that it has really helped cement for me what my what my priorities in life are,
Mm.
and realign, reorganize what those priorities are,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a significant barrier for me in my, what I'll say was my previous life, was my ability to build relationships with people,
Yeah.
right? Because that was part of the, that inability to build really deep, emotionally
Mm.
connected relationships was part of my
Mm.
protectors keeping me safe, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, when you are faced with mortality and you need help, uh, like, cultivating those deep, rich relationships is essential. It is essential to the process.
Mm-hmm.
And um, so this therapy work has, I really feel strongly, has enabled me to deepen by orders of magnitude the love and depth of connection that I have with my partner, with my friends, with my support system. And um, that has become one of my like primary priorities in my life are these relationships that I have with people. My previous life, I reflect back on it as being very ego driven,
Mm.
and in which relationships were conditional,
Mm.
right? Based on, I'll do this for you if you do this
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it was in advancing my own more or less ego driven agenda. And Scott, I'll tell you, that is a distant memory. What feels like a distant memory for me is
Wow.
all of those ambitions and
Yeah.
insecurities that I used to have, they just don't seem that important anymore.
Wow.
And what does feel
Wow.
important is the relationships that I have with the people that are close to me in my life. And I think psychedelics have been very valuable in helping me, again, like, practice. It isn't a switch that just turns on and off, right? It is rewiring your whole system, and that
Mm.
requires time and
Mm-hmm.
practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've been working on.
There has been a lot that you've said today that I, for one, will take with me, ponder, process. You know, at this point in the episode, I usually like to take a step back and throw out one takeaway that I have gotten from the conversation. Uh, in this particular case, there are going to be many weeks worth of takeaways that pop into my mind as I think about everything that you've said. And I want to thank you for offering us so much. The relationship between connection, how we face our own mortality, how we operate day to day, is one thing that comes to mind immediately in business or in most large corporate organizational environments. That transactional approach, you do this for me, I'll do that for you. Reciprocity, that is, as you're saying, when I think about it, really ego driven, is the norm. And you saying that psychedelics have created this ability to perceive these things for really what they are, and to not only perceive them and understand them for what they are, but to be able to leave them behind, is just one thing that I think will be really valuable for me going forward. It's one thing to say, and we all say it, and I say this, oh, ego isn't where we want to be at. We want to be collaborating. We want to build together. But saying these things and really living them and experiencing them and transforming our life into a different direction because of that is an entirely different matter. And I really hear you and I feel you when you say it. The other thing, too, that is a big takeaway for me is just that these blockers or these things that keep us from connecting, that have a protective function perhaps, but ultimately become dysfunctional, have potential to be removed. These protectors, as played out in my own life, insidiously brought me trouble and toil and pain for years until I was able to let them go. All I can say is you've really vividly demonstrated the power of being able to say goodbye to those forever. John, is there any last takeaway that you would like to share with us and that you'd like us to remember this episode by?
I will just say that this work is it's hard. It's really hard, and it's really uncomfortable,
It sounds
and
like it.
it can uh, it can it can fully deconstruct your life. Now, so that's the disclaimer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that this work is hard, it is very uncomfortable, and it can shake your foundation
Mm-hmm.
vigorously. Uh, in my set of circumstances, my entire life was collapsing around me already. when you pair the cancer diagnosis with the state of the world during the pandemic, with me dissolving my company, with me leaving a relationship, all of these things were essentially happening simultaneously. And so I was in an exquisite position to take this work on because everything was changing around me anyway. So why not go there? It was like I was perfectly primed to take this work on, right? That may not be the case for everybody to do this kind of intense psychedelic assisted therapy work. So, you know, that's the disclaimer for it, is that I was primed, and I was like fertile soil for this work to be transformative. You know, at a time in my life where like everything was in a state of upheaval anyway, let's just keep shaking that tree. So,
but you know, I've got to say, hearing that, number one, like life going at a sudden upheaval and the walls closing in. I mean, that's, you know, that's as universal of an experience as anything.
Yeah.
And so even knowing about this as a possibility when the time comes where we may finally be primed is huge. And then I think the other thing too, you know, we only live this life once.
Yeah.
I know it's a cliche to say, but trash in, trash out. What are we making of our life? What are we bringing into our lives experientially? Is it just trash? Well, what is the output of our life going to be? Do we want it to just be trash? I mean, I guess if I'm going to throw out one last takeaway and respond to this as you will, because I want you to have the last word today. But, you know, life in a way is too short, as your own experience demonstrates. It's too tenuous. It's too fragile. We have choices to make. Do we really want our outputs of our lives to just be trash? To me, that's what one more thing that I need to think about as I ponder everything that you shared today.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I would say that my greatest challenge and the loftiest aspiration that I have in this work is healing myself, in which survival isn't the prize.
I think I just heard a mic drop. John, we could talk for hours. Where can people who want to learn more about you go to follow you?
I post pretty regularly on my Facebook page, which is John Quincy Waller on Facebook. And I have a Care Bridge page that I'm not sure what the link is off the top of my head, but that is active out there. I would say that the sort of primary way to connect with me is through Facebook.
Great. Thank you very much. John, it's been great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your story, sharing your wisdom, and for just being so naked and raw and out there. It will change people's lives, I have no doubt. For those of you who are listening or watching, keep tuning in. In upcoming episodes, we're going to discuss the relationship between psychedelics and everything from geriatrics to leadership itself. I'm so stoked thinking about what we have to come. I can barely contain myself. And if you enjoyed or got meaning from today's episode and want to learn more, be sure to subscribe, leave a review or a comment, and tell everyone that you know about what we're doing. Also, don't forget to follow Webdelics on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Be sure to check our website out at webdelics.com. That's Webdelics Then sign up for our blog for trusted information about plant medicine and psychedelics. Then join us next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.